You're listening to The Issues from the Capital Region. In upstate New York, I'm Alicia Purdy. Albany County Executive Dan McCoy said the county will perform contact tracing on anyone who flies into the county from states on New York's quarantine list, which currently includes Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Louisiana, Mississippi, Nevada, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah. McCoy's decision follows Warren County's announcement it is trying to track down passengers on flights from Florida that carried 3 county residents who later tested positive for COVID-19. The infected passengers were on flights that flew into Albany International Airport, one on June 25th on Allegiant Airlines Flight 1505 from Punta Gorda, and another arriving on June 26th on Allegiant Airline Flight 754 from St. Petersburg, Clearwater. The county urged anyone who was on those flights to call their county's public health department immediately. The cases emerged as New York, once the nation's hotspot for coronavirus cases, urged people to self-quarantine for 14 days after arriving from Florida, Texas, California, and several other states, where COVID-19 cases more recently are exploding again. Warren County Administrator Ryan Moore said in a statement that the new positive cases should serve as a wake-up call to anyone who isn't taking the virus seriously, noting that New York State and the Capital Region have improved, but the threat remains, urging New Yorkers to get smart about their vacation destinations and avoid putting local communities at risk. Sheriff's deputies said an Albany County corrections officer who claimed that someone threw a lit firework into his New Scotland home over the weekend lied about the incident. Last week, it was reported that a firework had been thrown into the residence of an employee of the Albany County Sheriff's Office who said he was at home in New Scotland watching television with his wife and 4-year-old daughter when an unknown individual, he says, opened the front door of the residence and threw a lit firework into the living room, causing it to explode at the feet of the Sheriff's Office employee and burning an area rug. The man said he and his wife extinguished the firework with a pillow before it could ignite the surrounding area and no injuries were reported. However, now deputies have charged Ryan Lawson with filing a false report, which is a misdemeanor. He was arrested Wednesday afternoon and released on an appearance ticket. An investigation concluded that the firework was lit inside the house by someone in Lawson's family. The sheriff's office would not comment on a possible motive for the false report. Along with criminal charges, Lawson will also likely face a suspension or termination from his job at the county jail. The owner of Bumpy's Polar Freeze, a popular ice cream shop in the Woodlawn neighborhood of Schenectady, is racking up fines of $2,000 per day for ignoring a Schenectady County Health Department shutdown over a minor violation, according to County Attorney Chris Gardner. Gardner said last week that Bumpy's owner, David Elmendorf, was charged with obstructing governmental administration for allegedly tearing down and ripping up notices posted at his State Street business for it to close down. Gardner said Elmendorf was released pending a future court date, adding that the man had also been warned about making sure staff and customers follow 6-foot rules about social distancing recommendations and mandating employees wear masks, noting that Elmendorf had been totally uncooperative. This is not the first time Elmendorf, a former Schenectady County corrections officer, has clashed with the government and locals alike. In fact, more than 200 people gathered earlier this week outside of Bumpy's Polar Freeze to rally against Elmendorf, who allegedly sent text messages using racial slurs and saying he doesn't hire black people, even though several black employees were seen at the ice cream shop during the day of the rally. Protesters blocked part of State Street in front of the restaurant for more than 2 hours. The protest culminated with the shop shutting down for the evening's 3 hours earlier than usual, with 3 employees, all of whom are black, walking out saying they would quit. The situation eventually escalated from a peaceful protest to a contentious and anger-fueled mob. The attorney for embattled Bumpy's Polar Freeze owner, David Elmendorf, denies his client is a racist and said they've hired a private investigator to learn why Schenectady County, whom Elmendorf plans to sue, and others seem to be working together to try and destroy the businessman, firmly stressing that the text messages attributed to Elmendorf, where senders refer to the blacks in derogatory terms and proclaim the business doesn't hire them, were not from his client, who has now been receiving death threats. Elmendorf's attorneys also decried that the Schenectady County Attorney's Office failed to verify who was behind the racially charged text, which has led to a series of scare tactics, including physically threatening anyone who approached Bumpy's. Tensions have escalated to the point that Elmendorf recently pulled a gun on a group who was physically assaulting one of his friends. The gun, which was a legally owned pellet gun, was effective in chasing off the perpetrators. As a result of the ongoing chaos, County Attorney Chris Gardner asked the state's Attorney General's office to conduct an immediate civil rights investigation into Elmendorf's, quote, discriminatory and illegal actions, saying that racist rhetoric and admission of racial discrimination would constitute a violation of the New York State Human Rights Law and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Gardner said the time had come to deal swiftly and justly with an individual who would spread racist rhetoric and boast of his refusal to hire individuals based upon the color of their skin. It is unclear if Gardner was aware that the 3 Bumpy's employees who quit during Sunday's protests were actually all black men. Furthermore, the beleaguered Bumpy's owner categorically denied every allegation, saying he's not racist and has young people of all races working for him, and he accused Schenectady County of using civil complaints and alleged permit violations as leverage against him to shut down his business for personal reasons. 2 men are now behind bars almost 1 year since a 3-year-old was shot in the arm while sleeping inside a daycare. Jarrell Howard and Baki Green were both sentenced Wednesday to 15 and 10 years respectively for their roles in the shooting. 17-year-old Howard is also accused in a number of recent shootings in the Albany area last month, including a homicide. Albany County District Attorney David Soares says Howard's sentencing removes one of the most dangerous people in Albany County from the community. Soares is blaming the Raise the Age law for allowing Howard to be released under the supervision of probation between his arraignment in the daycare shooting and his sentencing, therefore allowing further violence he's accused of committing. Soares says there was a chasm created by the Raise the Age law that allowed Howard to be released under the supervision of probation after being convicted in the daycare shooting. Soares called Howard the poster child for the failure of the law, saying that what the Raise the Age law has done is taken the most violent youth in the communities and instead of allowing those cases to be reviewed and prosecuted and investigated by prosecutors, have put those cases in family court where an objective is to unify people. Soares called it a move that made no sense. When Albany Mayor Kathy Sheehan tried to lay blame for Howard's crimes at the feet of law enforcement, questioning how County Probation Department handled Howard's supervision, Soares pushed back, saying the Probation Department did all it could do under the law to monitor a young man with no concern for his own life who was determined to kill. Soares called Sheehan's questions absurd for implying that such an individual would respect the restrictions of an ankle monitor. Soares is now asking lawmakers to revisit the Raise the Age law in light of the ages of individuals. He says police continue to arrest. A Schenectady man has organized a sign wave rally in Princetown, New York on July 4th to show a wave of local support to area law enforcement. Earl Wallace, a local author and motivational speaker, announced the event on Facebook, saying he wants to support righteousness between citizens and law enforcement and corrections officers. According to Wallace, an African-American man, the Bible clearly explains the rights upon which American culture was built, and amid ongoing tensions between the racially motivated Black Lives Matter movement and the majority of American citizens who do not ascribe to the overtly racist and increasingly violent rhetoric of the group, Wallace wants to make a positive difference. The rally will take place in 1-hour increments throughout the day, and signs will be provided for scheduled appearances in Scotia, Schenectady, Colony, Guilderland, Latham, and Clifton Park. Meanwhile, earlier this week, Capital Region Representative and self-proclaimed Socialist Democrat Paul Tonko decried President Trump and Republicans at large, saying they have no plan to combat systemic racism, throwing his weight behind the Justice in Policing Act, which would, among other things, establish a way to track, monitor, and prosecute police officers who are deemed to be in violation of acceptable law enforcement practices and require body cameras for all on-duty officers. Liz Joy, a grassroots Republican who was running against incumbent Paul Tonko, recently held a Back to the Blue barbecue to support local law enforcement, saying the vitriol against law enforcement does not represent the majority of Americans. In fact, she said the majority of Americans are appalled at what is taking place in the country right now against law enforcement officials. Joy said while she recognizes there may be a fight, she believes things will turn around once officials are swiftly voted into office who will have the backs of law enforcement as much as law enforcement has always had the backs of the American citizens. Also present at the barbecue was former state trooper Rich Amador, a Republican who was running to replace departing incumbent Republican New York State Senator George Amador Jr. According to Rich Amador, law enforcement is under greater threat than ever before in the state of New York as Governor Cuomo repealed 50A, a move that was vocally supported by Paul Tonko. 50A encompasses a law which served to protect the private personal information of law enforcement, including their home addresses. Amador noted that Cuomo's repeal effectively made law enforcement and their families targets for criminals who are determined to cause them harm. The governor also announced an executive order that requires the roughly 500 police departments across the Empire State to develop a plan by April 1st, 2021 to address systemic racism in their ranks. If a department doesn't fall through, Cuomo said he will strip it of state funding. Another one of Cuomo's most recent laws makes it a hate crime in New York to call 911 to report crimes where a person's race is a factor. Liz Joy publicly announced her support of law enforcement and said she will continue to fight for as long as she needs to in order to win. A group suing the city of Glens Falls over a law requiring demonstration permits hosted a First Amendment rally at Centennial Circle on Thursday. It was the first time members of American Patriots Express, or APEX, have gathered in the city since the Common Council adopted a city code back in February, putting a temporary stop to the rallies. APEX sued the city on June 16th, alleging the law violates the First Amendment on a number of grounds. Police Chief Anthony Lydon was named as a defendant in the lawsuit. Around 36 assembled for the First Amendment rally at the corner of Glen and Warren Streets with American flags and banners in support of President Donald Trump and 21st Congressional District Rep. Elise Stefanik of Schuylerville. Amid the celebration, a lone counter-protester stood at an island in the middle of a traffic circle holding an anti-Trump sign. Police asked her to move to a nearby sidewalk. The rally featured a number of speakers, including Cara Castronova, who appeared on season 11 of the NBC show The Biggest Loser and is an ardent Trump supporter. Castronova accused City Mayor Dan Hall of being corrupt for approving the section preventing their peaceable assembly, which was adopted unanimously by the city's Common Council in February following months of debate. Those in attendance at the rally agreed, saying the law needs to be repealed because it tramples on First Amendment rights of anyone in the city, regardless of political views. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order preventing the city from enforcing the law as a decision to issue a temporary injunction is decided. City Attorney Ronald Newell has denied any wrongdoing on behalf of the city and said legislation was crafted to ensure public safety while affording people the ability to exercise their First Amendment rights. Members of APEX are vocal supporters of President Donald Trump and often hold counter-protests to those protesting the president throughout the city. The Glens Falls APEX rally was open to the public, regardless of political views, and featured speakers from both ends of the political spectrum, and the group informed the Glens Falls Police Department of their plans ahead of time. Governor Andrew Cuomo was dealt a blow when the U.S. District Court Judge Gary L. Sharp issued a preliminary injunction this week on behalf of 2 Catholic priests and 3 rabbis who were suing Governor Cuomo, Attorney General Letitia James, and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, effectively blocking them from enforcing state restrictions on outdoor and indoor religious gatherings that are stricter than those imposed on comparable secular entities. According to Sharp, the balance of hardships tips in favor of the religious leaders, saying that in the absence of an injunction, religious activities will be burdened and continue to be treated less favorably than comparable secular activities. Judge Sharp, who presides over the Capital Region and the Northern District of New York, also took issue with Cuomo and de Blasio voicing their support for thousands gathering at Black Lives Matter protests, noting the double standard and saying that the 2 leaders could just as easily have discouraged protests, short of condemning their message, in the name of public health, and exercised discretion to suspend enforcement for public safety reasons, instead of encouraging what they knew was a flagrant disregard of the outdoor limits and social distancing rules. Sharp also said by acting as they did, Governor Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio sent a clear message that mass protests are deserving of preferential treatment. The Thomas More Society, which has been representing the clergy suing the government, celebrated the injunction as a blow against selective enforcement of social distancing guidelines. In June, New York City workers welded shut gates to a park in a predominantly Hasidic area of Brooklyn, after residents continued to take their children to the park. This was done as part of Cuomo's state order to prevent crowds from gathering. However, at the same time, park gates were welded shut to keep out children and their mothers. Thousands were allowed to protest in mass gatherings throughout the city. The Federal Department of Justice issued a statement last week from Assistant Attorney General Eric Dryband of the Civil Rights Division, who said that the federal court decision is a win for religious freedom and the civil liberties of New Yorkers, supporting the knowledge that government cannot discriminate by protecting free speech and the right to assemble while threatening or limiting religious exercise. Dryband said it must protect all rights guaranteed under the First Amendment.
You've been listening to The Issues in and around the Capital Region. In upstate New York, I'm Alicia Purdy.